So our next speaker is Savita. And if I can just say a little bit about your background in case you're too modest to say. So if I'm correct, you did a PhD in developmental biology in Cambridge. You then went to work, I don't know why, but you went to work for the Wellcome Trust, where you were for quite a number of years and learned a lot about research management. You then came back to India, where you joined NCBS and set up their research management office. And then you decided that that wasn't enough, so you wanted to do this on an all-India basis and set up your company called Jaquaranda Tree. And it was really lucky for us because just at that time we'd been talking to the India Alliance about how we might actually do some work looking at the research management functions within institutions in India. And I think just by nice chance you were looking around at that time, and so you've now been working with India Alliance I think for about a year or more, and now you're going to talk about some of your work in research management. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Simon. Huge thanks to the India Alliance for inviting me to speak at the session today, and I must say a huge thanks to the India Alliance and Wellcome Trust for taking an interest in building research ecosystems in India, of which research management is one part. So I don't really need to say this to this audience, but the life of the average researcher is a constant sort of juggling of priorities, and in red, the magical, elusive, seeking funding and managing it, it really taxes everybody. This is a horrible diagram, but stripped down, the grant cycle, so many details, so many steps, so many conversations. And the average researcher, I think it's pretty much impossible to keep track of all of these steps, all of these details through the whole process. So many institutions worldwide have come up with the solution of providing institutional support with several aspects of that horrible grant cycle that I just showed. So some of these include partnership building. So for example, if you're looking to be part of a major consortium, how do you go about finding partners? How do you seek partners in the UK, the US, wherever else? There might be some institutional support available for that. Pre-award support with finding funding opportunities, knowing exactly what to apply for, when the deadlines are, and so on and so forth. Ethics is another area. Most institutions do have ethics support. So there's a whole series of these activities which are at the boundaries of research with other disciplines, but which are not precisely the conduct of research. And these activities actually happen at not just institutions, but at other stakeholders as well. So at funding agencies, for example, publishing houses, and the international missions. So I'm going to just take a little detour here and say a story. This is about an African university, Muhimbili University. In about 2008, Muhimbili had very good research collaborations with UCSF focused on HIV research. But there was this growing realization that to make it an equal partnership, Muhimbili needed their own research management structures. So there was actually a small Gates Foundation grant which allowed them to do the scoping study to establish what the research is needed. And this was followed by a much larger NIH grant, which over a period of time allowed Muhimbili and UCSF to have an exchange program that helped build research management capacity. The point of telling this story is that local problems can impact global thinking, but local problems need local solutions, and those local solutions do take time. So this story is over 10 years of time. So in a similar manner, the India Alliance and the Wellcome Trust decided to get interested in the problem of research management in India. And in 2016 were the first steps towards that. The Wellcome commissioned a scoping survey. It was a project that involved both Africa and India, looking at, and the Indian conversations were centered around conversations with 5 institutions. And at the end of it, we had a workshop in Delhi, and that's the sum total of people at the workshop. There's a handful of research managers, a handful of funding administrators, and the consultants. And so building from there, the India Alliance launched IRMI, or the India Research Management Initiative, early last year. And the purpose of IRMI really was threefold. One is to raise awareness about research management in India. The second is to actually engage with the community. And the third was to gather insights, to understand the gaps, with a longer term aim of deciding, well, what could either the India Alliance or other funders do to plug some of those gaps. And we decided to use a framework of 3 themes for the purposes of the first year of the ERMI project, which was called the ERMI pilot. So the 3 themes were leadership, sustainability, and building individual capacity. Because as you would have seen in Professor Arora's slides, awareness of research management is very important for leadership, just as much as this is important for either researchers or for the staff. And this needs to be a sustainable function at institutions. And of course, if you have a cadre of staff who are actually performing research management roles, then they need to be trained and motivated to keep doing their jobs extremely well. So in consultation with the India Alliance, we decided on a group of institutions to reach out to. So the total group were about 40, and we asked them to fill out registration forms to formally join the initiative. 31 institutions actually filled out the registration forms, and that opened up the dialogue. So we picked institutions from all across the country, different kinds of institutions. Those are funded by the DBT, by the MHRD, medical research centers. So it's quite a spread of different kinds of institutions to get a snapshot of what research management in the country looks like. So one of the things we did was to organize sharing sessions. As I said, an objective of ERMI was to raise awareness. So rather than conduct workshops where an instructor would talk down to people attending the workshop, the way this was structured was each workshop we would invite people from 15 institutions or so at each iteration. And we requested institutions to send a leadership representative and a research management staff representative, so that we were capturing both sets of views. And working through the framework of leadership, sustainability, and careers, through the course of the workshop, through the course of the conversations, we were exploring these different aspects of research management in India. And there was one crucial element to these workshops. They were based at Ayyar Pune, at NCBS, and at Jamia Hamdard. And we included in those workshops representatives from institutions in India who've actually set up research management structures effectively. And so in many ways, that was the biggest ambassador of the use of research management structures. Another thing that the workshops allowed us to do was to actually reach out to research managers. Now, I must say that till this happened, this was a hidden population in the country, sort of tucked away in some institute somewhere, but because I was proactively asking institutions to nominate research managers to attend the workshops, we were actually able to get them together in a place, and they shared their career stories. And in many ways, this was the first networking event ever for Indian research managers. And a third element, which was actually really nice, was that research management is a global profession. And there's actually an organization called INORMS, which organizes a major international conference in research management. And last year, there was a small group of us, 7 of us from India, who actually went to Edinburgh for this conference. There were 1,100 research managers from all across the world, and this small team was part of that. So on the one hand, it was an opportunity for us to experience the power of the network, but it was also an opportunity for me to ask the research manager colleagues what they thought about the level of organization in other countries, the level of training in other countries. So what's emerged from our conversations also is, if you look at the ERMI institutions, as we refer to the 31 institutions, financial management of grants is available at all institutions. This is a core function. It is done. The grant spend statements are generated. However, if you look at the pre-award stages, which is what do I apply for? What is the deadline? How does one approach this funding? That was there only at 9 out of 31 institutions. And I must say that this is a problem, not just for the researchers who are applying for the grants. It's a problem for the institutions, because the institutions aren't actually looking through their grant proposals very well. And it's a problem for the funders, because once the applications leave the institution, they're at the funder for processing. So out of the ERMI institutions, we realized that there was a small group of institutions that actually made a start with this transition from having just financial management support to having broader support. And so when we spoke to the leadership at the institutions, there were several who were keen on setting up structures, but they shared concerns with us. One concern, of course, was why should we invest in institutional structures while the funding agencies are difficult to deal with, the bureaucracy is hard to deal with. The answer is maybe if you set up institutional structures, that at least helps to improve at the institutional end. But there were a couple of other concerns raised. Well, we need staff to carry out these research management roles. Where do the staff come from? Do we use our existing administrator pool? Do those administrators have sufficient training? If they don't have training, how does one ensure that they are trained? Or is it that we need to be looking at a different pool of administrators, possibly scientific administrators, who've been through the research process? How does one recruit these staff? How does one retain them? How does one give them long-term prospects? Because it is very difficult in the Indian system, particularly in government institutions, to actually support the recruitment of highly specialized administrative staff. And looking at the research managers who are actually, who've gone on to create research offices in India, several of them, as it turns out, have worked at funding agencies previously and then gone on to take up institutional roles. In fact, several who have been trained at the India Alliance. And speaking to the research managers about their concerns, well, they had a whole bunch of their own concerns, which is, how do I get buy-in from the community? How do I engage with the scientific pool at my institution and, get them to agree to work well with the office? There aren't any sort of standardized processes or guidelines for any of these functions, whether it's pre-award management or post-award management. And a huge sense of isolation, because as I said, it is a very small number of people in India right now in such roles. So the isolation was actually quite a recurrent theme. Job security being another one, which is what are the long-term prospects for roles like this? And we started looking at the training opportunities available, and actually it's quite thin on the ground in India at this point. So the DST has been supporting training in research management for a long time, but these courses are actually aimed at active scientists. And the idea is that those courses are used to educate the scientists about research management that they can take back and turn into effective deans and directors, so possibly some leadership skills there. So there is clearly a lot of work that needs to be done in building training programs for Indian research administrators, but this needs to be done through the work of several different stakeholders. And if you look at how this is organized in other countries, like for example, the UK, the US, or Australia, not only are there research offices staffed by research managers, but the research managers are actually part of associations, and those associations provide the right platform for training and networking for the research managers. And so this was the other outcome of our INOMS trip last year to Edinburgh. The group came back realizing that for research management in India to gain a foothold, ultimately it would be great to have an association of research management professionals. This would be needed for validating the profession and for the opportunities. And a slightly different aside over here, there was a survey designed in 2016 which was intended to capture information on research management and administration as a profession. This was a global survey and it was run across a huge number of associations across the world. The results were published last year. India is missing from that. India is missing from that because we don't have an organized structure that a survey like this can tap into. But it would be nice in future for India to be part of a global conversation like that. So looking ahead, what might research management in India need? So the top of that pyramid is the golden aim, so to speak, which is to have an association which offers a platform for networking and training. international collaborations as well. But for the association to be meaningful, we need a substantive membership base, so large numbers of research managers across the country. And of course, that needs institutions to be hiring people into research management roles, which in turn requires funders' support. So for funders and for institutions to be working effectively together over all of these kind of functions. So Dr. Jamil and I wrote up an open letter on these insights that have emerged from the ERMI pilot. This is published on Welcome Open Research. I invite all of you to read it. And I'm around in case you'd like to discuss the paper or any of the themes that I've covered in the talk. A few thank yous. This work would not be possible without Shahid, without the India Alliance staff, particularly Madan, Sara, Banya and Sarita. Simon and his team at the Welcome have been really helpful, great conversations. Certainly the Indian research community and the Indian research management community from whom we've learned a lot over the last year. So on that note, I'll just end this to a minute.
I'm glad also that you referenced Alan, who's based at Nairobi. So we've been very keen actually to see as much overlap and collaboration as we can between these initiatives in sub-Saharan Africa and India. Are there any questions, challenges, agreement, disagreement? Institutional directors like Jitu saying this is great.
Savita, very, very interesting presentation. I just had one comment from the Indian context. I mean, it seems research management organizations also function where there are possibilities for employment. That's one thing I noticed you didn't bring up, because in the Indian context,
yes,
there are almost no positions for people who have these responsibilities of research management, and it's a very difficult task to support such research management structures and administration in most research institutions, because these sorts of jobs are not available. Yeah. So I don't know how I mean, that's a challenge, and I don't know how one is going to resolve that. But unless that's resolved, I think India is going to be off that map.
Which is why the bottom part of that pyramid, which I have left as funders, actually refers to, in particular, the government of India. Can we have some change in the policies that allow recruitment of such individuals and a decent long-term career track for such individuals? Because otherwise, it's the other stakeholders, the funders and publishing houses, which will continue to attract people. But we won't see that trickling into the institutions. It will not turn into the movement that India needs. Yes.
Yeah, thanks, Savita. Excellent presentation, quite close from the presentation we had on leadership. I have a query. When we talk about research managers in the Indian context, what exactly the job description covers here?
So in the global context, this is actually quite a large group of sort of responsibilities. I had that on one of my earlier slides. So on the one hand, it could be clerical functions, but that's not the case anymore. There could be specialist functions like legal and accounts. There could be more academic related functions. For example, ethics support, pre-award management. Those do require a background in science or an understanding of the research process. But apart from that, so there is actually quite a different range of roles, and for each of those roles is an optimum sort of qualification and experience level.
Of the functions that you listed, any manager, any MBA will be doing those functions. So what are the crucial differences?
So, for example, if you were to take operations management, financial management, those are more standard management functions. Here we are referring to portfolios which are closer to the research, but which might need a skill set that is somewhere in between pure research and management. So, you know, for example, this whole pre-award management that I mentioned, which is where does one go for funding, how does one put the proposal together, which has been kind of developed into quite a extensive process in other countries and which is missing in India. That's more the kind of research management we are referring to.